as you probably know, I'm Dr. Shankar Vijay, but what you probably don't know is I'm also one of the London Digital First leads. So just to check that everyone knows where they are, this is a webinar to basically cover the new-ish national solution for patients to register with a GP surgery service online. So I can see that Finn's also joined us. We are going to record this webinar, so if you don't want to be captioning the recording, please do make sure you turn off your cameras, otherwise you will be captioning the recording, which will probably be uploaded to something like YouTube. Brilliant. So I'm going to try and take you through in half an hour what is this service and how your practice could embrace it. I'm going to suggest in the chat if you want to post comments, queries, but I'll hopefully try to answer all the questions we go from, and we're going to end with a question section. I'd also like to mention that we've got members of the National Register with a GP Surgery Service in this webinar, so they may also help pick up some points and if I make any mistakes. Okay, so just first thing is, if you look at these slides, I've got these QR codes that you can scan in. If you happen to have a mobile phone, I'd really recommend that you try scanning this one here using your camera function and test the service if you've not experienced it before as we go along. I've also posted a link in the chat as well. So what we're going to do in the next 30 minutes, we're going to look at how does this service work? Why on earth should we be using it? And then how do we set it up? And we'll conclude with some questions. If you're joining the webinar, can I ask that you try to keep your mic on mute to avoid any interference? Brilliant. Okay, so 4 sections. Let's crack on. So how does it work? What is under the hood of this service? What is it all about? Before we look at the service, let's just look all around us. What is going on in the government's websites and the NHS website? If you look at the design of these, I don't know if any of you tried renewing your passport online, but to me, it's made the service so much easier. No stress about getting the photographs right, running to post offices, thinking what's going on. It's made it seamless, quicker. Taxing your vehicles, I don't know if you've experienced that, but it checks the databases, checks you've got MOT, and you do it instantly. So there's this move to making these sort of transactional processes easier for everyone. And if you look at the design of them, simple English, simple layout, sort of a design theme with the buttons and colors being familiar. So once you start to get used to using one of them, you feel it's familiar when you do the other things. And the NHS is mirroring that approach. So there's the Find My GP service where patients use just to find a practice to register. So there's this design concept which makes it easier for meeting accessibility standards. If patients have restrictions with vision or other limitations, it makes it easy for them. So what is the Register with My GP Surgery service? Well, there's a QR code in the corner here. So if you want to scan it to test it, this is a dummy practice. So you're not going to send a practice a registration, but do test it. So first, this is free. This is a free online service funded by the National NHS team, maintained by them. It's available for all practices in England. And patients access it through the practice's website, posters, the NHS website, and the NHS app. We'll pick up on that later on in the webinar. Just to reassure you, this does not automatically register the patient for you. So just want to shatter any myths around that. So like when you've got patients handing in paper forms or using our Silicon Practice website forms that we've got at the moment in Ealing, and it comes into practice, you as a practice still maintain control about processing them and registering them. The aim of this is to reduce the admin burden for you. And to give you a sense of scale, over 500 practices are already using this, and 40 in Northwest London are using it. You might have seen those emails that went out a couple of months ago, so there's already 40 at least live with it. So what does the patient experience? So when they start the process, it asks them initially, who's registering? Is it yourself? Or are you doing it on behalf of someone else? So this could be a parent doing it for their child, or a carer doing it for the patient. And it asks the patient whether they want to log in with the NHS login. If you're not aware of the NHS login, it's like the front-end digital passport to the NHS. The NHS app is probably the main way that patients have created the NHS login, but it gives us all the assurance about who they are, whose identity, and it helps improve the experience for the patient where some of the information is pre-populated for them. But importantly, it doesn't mean they have to have the NHS login. And you can see that they can continue without it. I'm not going to show you all the questions on the form because that could take us some time. I would encourage that if you haven't scanned the QR code and tested it as we go along, you can see some of the questions. A bit like this photo, one of my holiday photographs, we could be speaking different languages. Some of us as practices maybe thinking we need to have all these questions that we want, and the patient may be on a different page thinking what are the questions they feel comfortable answering. These questions are the minimum that are required to register the patient. So it meets all the requirements that the NHS needs to process that patient that you need to do for GP links and etc. to register them. The questions are based on insights from GPs, professionals, those using those working in practices and the NHS digital teams. The questions are constantly monitored, they're changed, tweaked, removed based on all of our feedback. So the more and more practices that we come on board with this, the more we can shape the questions. But the key thing is that they're standardized. What happens next? So the patient completes that form. That form that they completed actually will tweak to meet their needs. If it's an adult patient versus a child patient, if they're new to the UK or not new to the UK, it's been a tweaked experience. But the practice receives this coming in via NHSmail. And this is an example of how it arrives. So you can see that the email arrives with the information in the body of the email. So you can effectively cut and paste it out the email if you want, but it also comes as an attachment to that email. So you've got that PDF attachment, and it's not a password locked file or anything. You can import it into the clinical system and save it into the records. It's quite easy to manage as a PDF. So you've got the benefits of both. If it's easy to cut and paste out the email, if the PDF is a bit more tedious, you receive it at both ends. At the top of that email, you get some extremely important information highlighted to you if needed. So it could be that whether or not they logged in for the NHS login, so if they're verified or not. If there's an issue that potentially they're out of your catchment area, it's flagged at the top. So it's easier for your admin team to see those key markers. So let's go back a step. How do our patients actually find this service? How would we promote it in our practice? How do they find it? First thing is our practice websites. So we're all on a similar platform at the moment, Silicon Practices, and here's an example where the current practice I'm working at, we've just put the link in to the page. You'll receive a dedicated link, and I'll explain that in a moment, for your practice that you can just paste in. The second way that patients find this is through the Find a GP service. So this is through the NHS website. You can test this again. So this is a QR code here. This will get you to the Find a GP service, or here's the URL link. And I've just done it for, again, that practice, Ealing Park Health Centre. So I've put in a postcode near the practice. So I just want to highlight how, when the search reports come in, you can see here that now there's a new box that emerges that once you've activated, it says online registration available. The next practice doesn't have that box there. So when the patient clicks on that, it takes them to the next screen, which is how to register with the GP surgery as an option. When they click on that, they again see this register online using the NHS website, and then it starts them to take them down the tailored that experience for that practice. So your practice will then link into the form there. So that's how they experience the find a GP service. And then the third way is through the NHS app. Although already the NHS app kind of links to the NHS website in some ways, in March this year, it's going to fully integrate. So that means that the NHS app will enable them to sort of register and use the similar experience of the Find a GP, where it can link to the online registration if you're using this process. It's worth remembering that over 30 million patients are registered with the NHS app. That's over 68% of the population. So there's already a significant user base with the NHS app out there. So what is the future with this register with my GP service? So we've just mentioned about NHS app integration by March 23, the constant review of registration questions, but this is the big one. Interoperability. You've just seen how the information arrives by email, the PDF, so there's still a manual process on there. The national team are working for interoperability with the IT systems. Being realistic, it's likely to end up arriving next year. Who knows if it arrives this year? And this will be where you get those information in as tasks into your clinical system, so it makes it even faster for you to process it. But from what I understand, you still obviously maintain control over the process. They're not being automatically registered for you. In the interim, there are some automation pilots where it's using third-party sort of providers or products that are trying to automate the data entry from that email, that PDF into your clinical system. This is something that you may see signs of over this year. So we've covered section 1 and 2 of this webinar. Section 1 was really about, what is the product? Sorry, we're actually only covered section 1. We're going on to section 2 now, which is why should we use it? So you might feel a bit like this practice manager. There's absolutely no benefits from what you've seen so far. You might want to stick with all this paper forms. Absolutely fine if you felt from so far, but I would still urge you, if you're feeling that, scan on that experience, demo the system. And this is another QR code. I'm going to scan on, during these webinar, you can hopefully hold your phone up to the your screen or your monitor and scan it up if you scan to experience it. But here's a second QR code, which takes you to more information. This is the NHS Digital sort of resource area relating to the Register with My GP Surgery service. So if you're feeling like that practice manager, just think about it as we go through the next slide to present the case. So here are some of the benefits. There's potentially improved data quality. The patients are more likely to be spine matched through the NHS login, the way the data is entered to the form. They can't proceed unless they've completed those information. So that's one massive improvement. Reduced administration. The form and questions are designed so you can complete the GP links to register the patient. So it should reduce your admin, your queries with that the information you've received. This is free. There are no ongoing costs for the practice. It is centrally funded through the NHS national team. You've seen how we've illustrated how it links to Find My GP in the NHS app. So you've got all that integration built in. And I would say, can you afford not to be on the service if the other practices in your area are using it? Are your patients going to flow through to them if they're using those platforms to register? Recently, it's now got the catchment area integration where it knows the catchment area for your practice and it flags it to the patient if they're in the catchment area or not in the catchment area. What actually happens in the form, the patient gets a warning saying that they're likely to potentially be at risk if they proceed with a registration if they're outside the catchment area. So it flags a risk. Still, the form and information may come to you, but at the top of that email, it would flag that this patient's outside the catchment area. So obviously, your practice process may be that you end up rejecting it if you can't register them. And accessibility standards. We don't have the headache of thinking, does this meet the current requirements for digital rendering, about accessibility? All that headache is taken away from us at individual practice level. I'm not going to go through detail through the next couple of slides because it repeats some of the previous slide, but just goes a bit more detail. Like do we, you reduce the walk-ins to your reception desk with queries or asking for paper forms, or that handwriting we have to try to interpret. Like we said, those questions, if they can't proceed without answering them, do you get more mandatory information? And the NHS login helps us having to think about ID, checking ID, and having more confidence in who that patient is. The maintenance of this, I mean, look, we can all feel really passionate about our questions and keep thinking about, do we have to update our questions on our paper registration forms, but do we have the time? Do we sort of react to them? Do we keep updating them? Do we have to keep updating forms on our website? With this, we don't. It's centrally maintained. And I've highlighted that kind of comment about income. I mean, if patients are more likely to use these platforms, the NHS website, the NHS app, to select their practice, does this help keep the practice with a steady stream of registrations? So going to move on to feedback. Here is 2 comments from people that may not be on the call. So 2 practices in Ealing, but we've got Finn on the call. So Finn, do you want to come off mute and just mention some of the practice experiences?
It's really simple. If you're using the Silicon Practice website way at the moment, it's exactly the same process, and it's really good in that they've already got an NHS number. It already finds them, so it's exactly the same as Silicon Practice, and we've got very few queries that we have to ring patients for. There are a few, but not many. So yeah, it really works really well.
Okay, thank you so much, Finn. So let's talk about some of the limitations, just to give a balanced approach to this. So I've put in red here some of the limitations. So the good thing is it's standardized. The bad thing is it's standardized. You can't tailor this question set for your particular practice if you wanted to add something. But how can we mitigate it? What is the green box telling us? A bit like online consultations, sometimes having so many questions, is it just frustrating for the patient? Would we want to experience that as a patient? And we're still able to suggest changes to that national team if we feel that things need to be in that list of questions. And if lots of us feel the same, that team will respond to that and look at those questions. I would ask if we even do put those questions in, do we ever get really decent responses from the patient? Do they always respond? And then even if we do get all that data from the patient, are we able to have the time to code it, react to it? So I'll just put that out there about sometimes we think the answer is millions of questions on our registration forms, but is that always the answer? We've also got the benefits of GP to GP transfer. So I know that doesn't always happen for various reasons, but often we may ask a lot of questions from our historical basis of thinking we never know anything about the patient, but increasingly we're in a different place now when we do register them and we get that transfer. And there's nothing to stop practice supplementing this process. So even if you get that incoming registration with that form, with that information, you could always send something further to that patient asking for additional information or additional questions. There's nothing to stop you to supplement it. If we look at the next red box, NHS login authentication only, no option for the patient to separately upload photo ID, proof of address, other documents. Understandably, the NHS is promoting the NHS login, and there isn't this second option of trying to email us things. We know that there's no requirement for the patient to give the ID and proof of address to register, but I can understand that often that can help resolve queries or mismatches on patients. So we can still supplement this process. If we did have a query, our admin team and reception team can reach out to that patient to send something electronically and digitally. You can still build your process on your practice website as a wraparound. Okay, so we've covered now what is it, what do we feel about why we should use it. So if we've now looked at it, we want to use it, how do we go about going live? Before I start this, I genuinely think that I could go through these slides and you could set up while I do this. It can be that quick. It literally takes minutes. I'm not challenging anyone out there on this webinar to do that, but there is a slight challenge maybe. But you could do this in the speed it takes me to go through these slides. But I also don't want you to relax. I know, guys, we're doing this webinar and it can be manic in practice. It's recording, we'll upload the video, the slides. I think you can even download it straight from the way that I've shared it. But if not, we'll try and post it in the chat afterwards, and we'll circulate it by email. So here we go. Now I'm just going to race through some steps. Don't have to absorb each step. This is probably the most critical step though. Here's a QR code again, so you can scan it to go to Profile Manager, but your Profile Manager, you may know, is what you do to respond to reviews on the NHS website. You can amend your opening hours. That's probably how we've visualized the Profile Manager. Usually it's linked to your NHS email. If you've got problems accessing, here's a service support email address if your profile's not set up correctly. Once you go into Profile Manager, there's this new box. Sign up for the surgery with a GP, sign up for the register with a GP surgery service. Just to see if you don't know how to get the Profile Manager, here's the URL there. So when you sign up, when you click on it, it's asked to start now. It asks you for the information that you require. This may not be very visible on this webinar if this slide isn't clear, but the main thing to think about is your practice email address that you're going to be using to communicate with. But it just highlights what you need to get ready before you start. And if your profile is linked to more than one practice, it'll ask you to select which practice you want to activate. And here it asks you for the email address that your practice is going to be using. I would encourage you to use probably your generic practice email address. So you enter it in, they'll send a verification code to that email address, you enter it, and then you can continue. And this is the questions you get asked. Does your surgery offer a language interpreting service for patients? I think the answer is obviously yes for all of us. We have silent sounds in Ealing and North West London, so we tick yes. Do you want to offer your patients the opportunity to nominate a pharmacy during their registration? I think most of us might want to think of saying yes to that, because if the patient's moved area, if you don't think about reallocating their pharmacy, you could be sending prescriptions to the wrong place. The patient may not be happy if they're traipsing across London or the country. So I would recommend going yes, but think through what you want to say here. And that is practically it. Just those two questions. It then says confirm details for the practice name. So it just show you the options you just entered, and you click confirm and complete. So that is why I think you could literally do this in seconds. And once you've got that, you hit that complete button, you get this response that you see straight away, and your practice will be shown your dedicated URL link. If you remember what I said about there's a link you need to paste into your practice website, this is your practice link so that your patients can use that link to get that online form process. So you need to keep this safe. Don't have to worry about keeping it safe, because straight away you should get an email to that your practice generic email address that you've set up, which also has the details there. And it's also got lots of other useful links. It's got links to resource libraries and other things in that email. Okay, so that was step one. Here's a couple of useful steps I think are worth doing at the same time. I think it's useful to think about that inbox in your email account, how you're going to structure it so that these forms come in. You might want to create a subfolder in your inbox called registrations. You might want to create an NHSmail rule, a bit like this. So this rule just says, if your NHSmail account receives emails from that email address, which is the one that the NHS digital team used to send you the forms, do you want to move the form to that subfolder? You might even want to put like a categorization where you can put a category that just gives a nice little flag on that email too. That's something you might want to create. And next, I would say test it. So actually do a test registration using your link. See that you get the email, have the confidence that it's working. By the way, this photo comes from one of the pilot practices for the for this whole service. If you want to scan this QR code, you can see what their experience was. So now step 4. You can go to your website and edit it yourself to put the link in. So it's quite easy to paste that link in. So here's like a registration page. Just paste that link in. Go through your previous web pages. There may be, particularly using the Silicon practice and you're using the adult and child separate forms, you might want to delete those web pages and update your content on those pages. If this sounds all too tricky and you're struggling, here's the email support for Silicon practice to assist. Right, so we've done the website. We now need to think about the rest of our practice, our communications. Here's a poster that you could do. And there's a QR code that would be your specific practice QR code that you put in here. So I've put this QR code to firstly download this editable poster. And this is a QR code that just takes you to wider resources that you may want to use. And beyond the practice poster, you may want to do media screens and social media. With media screens, here's a slide that you could literally take off from here and use if you want to put it on your new med advantage boards. I'm not so you could debate about how much impact it's going to have for new patients, but it's an option. And a bit of a side point, I'm going to show you quickly how to create those QR codes. It's really easy. You can go to your Microsoft Edge browser. You can paste that URL link that you've got for your practice just hover on these buttons and you can download that QR code and you can paste it into that poster so it's for your practice. If this is too complex or you're not wanting to do this, the registered My GP surgery team are happy to try and assist you to create your QR code, so you can just contact them for assistance. This is a Chrome browser experience, exactly similar process. One really small minor difference is the QR code has a central dinosaur by default. You can paste your own practice logo into there if you want. And I'm just highlighting this because beyond this service, beyond using Register My GP, you might find creating QR codes really useful for other things with the practice posters. So just a useful thing to know. So all three built into both the Edge browser and Chrome browser. Lots of other ways you can create QR codes, but probably the quickest way to do it. If you still have paper registration forms, don't throw them away. We still need to keep them for those who cannot use online digital solutions. You might want to do a minor facelift to your form to suggest that they still add this header in and still signpost them to maybe the online version and use your QR code that you created. The national NHS digital team are working on creating a paper version of the online form so that we can mirror it with the two processes, so you get a consistency of approach, and that makes it easier for everyone. SMS preset template. I've put three suggestions here about SMS messages that you might want to create. One could be to use to signpost prospective patients to the online solution. One around once you've received the form, how do you communicate that they've been registered? And one about, if they were out of catchment area and you wanted to communicate that you weren't able to register them. There's still some dilemmas about how we send SMSs, whether the function is there to send it to a patient not registered with a different mobile number. But there's always been cases where we want to send it to even a registered patient, for example, a mother wanted to register her baby. And minor things, so think about practice email, so your generic email box. Have you got an auto reply that you want to just update to flag that they can also register through that link? Email signatures, maybe reception admin staff in your email signature. Do you want to signpost to a couple of things and again put your how to register with your practice link in here to reduce your queries? And then finally, the data entry template. So we're still manually entering data from the form into our IT system. So the template that you're using, you might want to tweak it to mirror the process. So it's easier to copy the order from the national form onto the form that you use on the data entry. We are looking at trying to update those templates centrally. So from an ICB level, we're exploring it, and the national team, we've flagged that as a need nationally as well. So if you are going to go live with this service, which I hope you are, you're hopefully familiar with my little Google Sheet. If you could use the user QR code or go on the link, just update us to know what your feelings are. Are you going live? You're not going live, so we can understand where practices are. And lastly, but most importantly, you've got to get the team behind this. So I don't think reception staff can really promote this to patients unless they've tried it themselves. So get key members of the team to try the QR code, test the system, so that they can encourage it. So this is obviously another practice not that far away from us in Ealing in Brent, one of the early sort of pilot practices, and the team got behind it and they're very positive about the experience. Okay, so we've done a race through in that half an hour. I hope we've covered what is it, how does it work, why should we use it, how do we get it set up. The webinar that recording and the slides will be shared to do that. I'm happy now to try and take any particular questions, and I think if there's any questions in the chat that we want to flag. The links here that I want to just show you before we take the questions, this is the link to that demo registration. This is the link to the main web page for the national resources to support you with information. This is the link to that Find a GP service that I've shown, and this is the Profile Manager which gets activated. Here's the email address for the support team that behind the Register with My GP service. Right, so should we see if there's any questions that need to be addressed?
Henry's answered the ones that have come through on the chat.
Okay. And I don't know, I mean, Henry, do you want to come off of me? Are there any particular themes from the chat or questions that you want to just pick up so we pick up for the recording purposes?
Yeah, I think, well, the first one's from Will, actually. I think we had a question around SCR consent, which is a question that we've been asked quite a lot, and it is something in our backlog of features to implement. So that is coming. Keep an eye out for that, Will, and we'll send some email comms out once that one's come in. And I think it was just another quick one I added in, just to say if you are like a group and you've got a couple of practices in your group, or you've got branches, just when you enroll using Profile Manager, just make sure that you complete one kind of registration per practice or per branch. And that's just to make sure that we get the catchment area kind of boundary checker tool that we've got in there reflected correctly. I think that's it.
And I've just seen another question pop up. So there's something about patient health questionnaire. Just to say that, yes, there are some health related questions as in the national one, but whether it covers the whole range of things that a practice may have in the existing registration form may be variable. So I think I'd encourage practices to firstly look at what is being asked, do that test experience, and then determine what you feel. I think for most of us, we don't think there's a huge range or any questions that we particularly want to ask on top of that. But if you did think there's critical things, like we said, the teams are open to feedback. But remember that more than 500 practices are currently using it, and that they're using it as their sole questions for health as well.
And just to add, they have changed since we started. So we went live last year in our Hounslow practice, and they've added things like carers and other things that we've asked for. So, if you do feedback, I'm sure if it's something that more than one practice is asking for, it will be considered. I couldn't find many things before today's session. I was trying to look for things that we could maybe add, and wasn't massive things that we would add. So it has changed a lot since it started. So it's pretty good.
Picking up the next question, no, so this is standardized. We can't attach additional forms or questions to that online experience that they get through the register with the GP surgery service. So if a practice still wanted to collect any further data beyond that, probably after receipt of that form, you'd either need to contact that patient, whether it's email them or text them with links to what the additional information you want to gather. You can also try to build that process in as part of how you design it on your practice website. You could even say that if there's particular things you really want to add onto it, do they complete the register with my GP surgery service, and then do they try to complete the next step that you outlined to them if there's additional things that you want them to send across. Looking at the next comment from Nisha, yeah, there's different approaches. So yes, there's different solutions through practice websites. So again, in Ealing, we're using Silicon Practice, which has a form that's constructed. However, I'd say that there's variability sometimes in functionality, whether or not they can use NHS login, and also there's still the maintenance issue. And when it comes in, most of them still have a manual method that you still have to process something on system one rather than being fully automated. Any other questions? I can see a question from Victoria about GP impact would be useful in the future. Again, you can have a look at the form and we can raise with the national team anything that we think would be useful. Okay, I think if we don't have Vin, are there any?
Sorin just put a question: do we need to complete DPIA for this process? And I think the answer to that is no, because we're not processing data. It's the same as the registration process.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Hi Shankar, it's Will, so part of the onboarding team. So correct. So though we do have a DPIA document, the NHS Digital and the GP, we are both joint data controllers. So we're simply moving that data across. So no documents required.
Okay, I think I'll be last chance to ask questions before we wrap up. So if anyone has anything, either just come off mute and ask us or post it in the chat. Okay, if not, I'd like to say a huge, massive thanks to you all for attending. I know it's manic in general practice to take time out to attend. Thank you. I hope you got that. My feedback would be just do it. I mean, I know changes are uncomfortable, and we always, we don't have time to change, but it is really quick to do. So I hope you do embrace thinking about deploying it in your practice. If there are questions or things that you think could be improved in the webinar, please do feedback, and we'll circulate everything around if you haven't received it already. And then just want to extend my thanks to Finn, as always, for being the amazing person behind the scenes to help organise the webinar and to make sure we're recording, and to reach out to the rest of the London Digital team who's supporting it, and the national team, Will, Henry and the team for doing all the hard work with the actual product. So yeah, thank you all for attending, and let us know if we can be any further help. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I'll let you all go.